The model of public-private partnership to design, build and deliver perfect infrastructure has been showing a rapid growth around the world, and Uzbekistan is no exception. The Uzbek government has been trying to involve the international organizations for advice and consultation in this initiative. Additionally, our compatriots who live abroad have been offered the job positions in the different spheres of Uzbek economy. Our guest today is the Deputy Director of the PPPDA under Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Uzbekistan, Mr. Nuriddinov. Welcome to our studio, Mr. Nuriddinov.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Nodir, would you please tell us about your life and work experience in the UK?
Right, so that is a long-winded question. I'll try to keep it short for our time purposes. So I have lived in the UK for 20 years. So I've initially moved there in 1999 for the purpose of studies. That was a new experience for the post-Soviet Uzbekistan back then. And it was quite uncommon for young students, I was 20 back then, to actually move abroad and to study there. Since I moved to the UK, I actually stayed there for 20 years. I've done various jobs. I mean, as anybody would expect, a young, motivated guy going abroad and trying to build his life. So I had an experience in different fields, and journalism being one of them as well. And I was involved in property business, in retail, in all sorts of businesses. And then I finally decided to move into finance. So I began my professional career with Deloitte, one of the big four auditing and consulting firms, and worked there for 4 years, and I specialized in PPP projects. So there I gained my experience, most of my experience in the PPP field, and once I got certified as a chartered accountant and an auditor, I decided to move on into industry, and I worked with a French company called Bouygues for 2 years. With the Bouygues, I also was involved in PPP projects, so mainly we were looking after the hospitals and schools and some government buildings. We also had some energy projects, not that many, but still quite a number of them. And after 2 years with Bouygues, I decided to move on in my career. I decided to move into more kind of high-tech industry, moving away from infrastructure and services and that type of line. And I moved to the company called Collinson. And right about that time, after a few years of my work there, Uzbekistan has gone under rapid reforms under the new leadership. So the need for cadres, the need for skilled people to run the country, to run the reforms, to drive the reforms through was dire and obvious. And the new president of Uzbekistan has put quite a lot of effort on highlighting and tackling that problem head on. And there had been quite a number of expats who built their career abroad in UK and America and different places, who were invited back to Uzbekistan, given the government positions, and were asked to actually put their put their effort in driving these reforms together with the country. And I would consider myself lucky enough to be one of them as well. Very good. So this gave me an opportunity to implement the knowledge that I gained from the UK, to implement the partnership between private sector and public sector, and to build the model in the most efficient way where both sides would be better off, and obviously this good partnership would benefit the population at large.
All right. How would you simply define the PPP?
So PPP is public-private partnership. It's a concept developed by British in early 90s. It was under the Labour government. Well, actually, first implementation was under the Conservative government of John Major, but then the Labour government actually took it forward. So the idea here is that the government is deemed to be inefficient in providing the infrastructure projects and services, be it in education, be it in road infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and everywhere. There are quite a lot of hurdles within the government, the first being the financing of the projects, because those multi-billion dollar projects involve quite a lot of budgetary constraints and would result in high level of the government debt. And in order to relieve that, the government involves private partner to come and help on the projects that the government is supposed to provide. So it could be roads, it could be energy, it could be education, healthcare, or anything that government is deemed to be a main provider. So the difference between privatization and the private-public partnership is manifold. So first and main thing in the PPP is that it is not privatization. So private partner is coming to help the government, not the other way around. The government is not going to help a specific private party to boost their income or anything. It's the other way around. So in order for that model to work well, is a proper structuring of the project. And when I say structuring, the main important bit there is risk allocation. So the government has to take some part of the risk on its own side, and the private partner has to take the risk on their own side as well. The second main difference is that the private partner comes with their financing. So how it helps the government is that it relieves the budgetary constraints. So government doesn't have to pay everything from their budget. There are different types of financing, paying for those services. It could be availability payment, which is paid from the government budget directly, or there is a user pay model where the end consumer, i.e. the people who use the services, will pay a sum to the service provider. There are obviously hybrid versions that partly would be covered by consumer, partly covered through the availability payments. So this model in 1990s was quite popular in the UK, and it was copied by different countries like Canada, Australia, Bangladesh, Middle East, Turkey, and all sorts of governments started to see this as a new way to investing into infrastructure, where the finances themselves are limited. So it's involving the private finance, the private expertise, the private skills and efficiency into the government infrastructure projects. And this whole program around the world helped to leapfrog the whole infrastructure process few years in advance. So where it was seen that the process is under the normal contemporary ways would take years and years to implement, it became much faster for those countries to actually get on with those projects.
Thank you. And what are the main projects are you involved in now?
So when Uzbekistan initially announced the PPP, the implementation of public-private partnerships in Uzbekistan, the priority services have been decided to be energy. And in energy projects, last year there was a flagship project of 100 megawatt solar plant in Navoy, and the tender process and everything was conducted openly, and the company, the Emirates company called Mazda, has won the tender, and they actually offered quite a very attractive price, the record-breaking price of 2.7 cents per megawatt of electricity. At present, we have 4 different energy projects in different stages of the tender process. all of them, the process and the model itself is being developed by the help of international financial institutions. So the International Finance Corporation, for example, is helping to build a CCGT plant in Sirdarya, the combined cycle gas turbine plant in Sirdarya of almost 1.5 gigawatts energy. IFC is also helping to build 400 megawatts solar plant in Samarkand and Jizak regions. ADB is consulting us in and providing the transaction advisory services for 200 megawatt solar project in Sherabat in Surkhandarya, and EBRD is advising us in building the wind turbines in Nukus. So the energy sector is quite diverse and quite advanced at present. So we have an experience and we have got loads of projects ongoing. Apart from energy projects, we have quite a number of projects in healthcare. So our flagship dialysis project is on the final stages of the tender. And we also have the work is being carried out on the oncology and radiology therapy centers, on multi-profile hospitals, on different laboratory services, both for oncology and for other contemporary illnesses. This is followed by the PPP projects in roads and transport sector. So we have our two major projects are Tashkent-Andijan Road, which includes the Kamchik Tunnel. We also have Tashkent-Samarkand Road that is going to be built under the PPP. And we have regional airports that the World Bank is helping us to develop the project concept forms and all of the project evaluation documents, and they're going to be advising us with the tender process as well.
Have you got any projects in education sphere?
Yes, in education we do. We are working with ADB to design, build and finance, operate and maintain 16 schools. Initially it was meant to be in Tashkent city itself, but now the focus is shifting from the city to Tashkent region. So the idea is it's pretty much the UK-based model, which is the government funded, so the government will be paying availability payments, and the private partner will come and build or rebuild and renovate 16 schools in different places. So when we say the private-public partnership in education, what we really mean for those specific projects is that the education itself is still remains with the government remit. So the private partner is not going to be providing the students or the teachers or anything. It's going to be purely government's role. However, the private partner is going to be providing all of the infrastructure needed for it. So it's building, it's the equipment, it's the security, it's the catering, it's accommodation if needed. So all of the infrastructure around it is going to be provided by public partner. Although there are some other models of PPP within the education where private partner is also providing the education as well, those fields are being looked at, and some of the prototype pilot projects are being implemented at present.
Okay. Since it's a new way of cooperation between government and private sector, are there any pitfalls in it?
Of course, of course. I mean, I would be open. PPP is actually quite sensitive issue around the world. If modeled incorrectly, it can lead to quite a number of failures. So as an example, only a few years ago, United Kingdom government has officially stopped all of the PPP projects. That is because, I mean, there is a little bit of political pressure was also involved, but because of the wrong structure of the PPP projects, it led to windfall profits for the private sector, and it was relieving instead of relieving the pressure from the government budget, it was actually adding to the pressure. However, saying that, the countries like Canada and Australia have learned from UK's mistakes, and they structured the projects in such a way that private and public sides are working in harmony with each other, and it's actually delivering a very striking and significant results. So that's why it is very important to understand the potential risks that PPP project can bring. The main risk in PPP projects is those are the long-term projects. So when you sign up a PPP project, it usually lasts on average about 20-25 years. So this means that government and private sector are tying themselves into a specific project for quite a time, and forecasting any issues in future is really difficult. So any slight alteration to the model, any slight intervention from any side can lead to quite a significant cost future on. So it's very important to understand what PPP is from the very beginning, and to actually model the whole, structure the whole project in such a way that it would bring the efficiencies that PPP is supposed to bring.
Mr. Nuriddinov, has COVID-19 pandemic affected your projects?
Yes, unfortunately it has, just like it affected everything around the world. So the first and obvious side of it is that all the transportation has been in a lockdown. So investors or the advisors, the consultants, are finding it difficult or even impossible to come to Uzbekistan and to see the projects or to actually give the advice. So the projects under the tender, they requested for 1 month extension for the relative stages, because it was proving difficult for them to either physically deliver their offers or to conduct necessary studies before bidding for the project. However, we have dealt with it just like every other organization is dealing. We are holding regular online meetings with both investors and all the other stakeholders in the process. And yeah, I mean, the lockdown conditions and the restrictions of the pandemics are being eased stage by stage, and we are hopeful that by middle to end of summer, the business as usual will return in some shape or form.
Our president is a hardliner in terms of corruption. What is your professional opinion about it?
Well, this is the theory that involving private partner is going to, or let's say reducing the role of the government will automatically reduce the corruption, which I agree to an extent. Now, the problem is the PPP is, I mean, if you look at PPP law, then it says that all of the fundamental, the foundations of the PPP project is supposed to be transparency, it's supposed to be competition, it's supposed to be openness, and it's supposed to be moving away from the corruption. However, that will happen only if the due process is followed. So selecting the private partner should be done via transparent ways, such as tendering process, where international observers or the people without any conflict of interest are members of the tender commission, and they will be objectively evaluating every bid. However, as soon as one side starts to collude in the whole process, then PPP is not going to be an answer. It's actually going to make things worse. So tying back to your previous question, whether the PPP model always works, no, it doesn't. So this is why I'm stressing the importance of structuring everything properly and actually having the transparent and corruption-free and fair process established from the beginning.
Nadir, you've been here in Uzbekistan for a while, and I guess you have your own vision. And how would you define the future collaboration between public and private sectors?
Well, the PPP Development Agency is actively trying to build the pipeline of the projects. Now, the important thing for the government is credibility. So once the government has the credibility of the international investment community, then those investors are going to be willing to come and invest. Now, in order to build that credibility, there should be several steps should be taken. One is openness and transparency, as we mentioned before. But the second thing, which is quite vital, is to have a project pipeline. Once the investors see that there are quite a number of projects that government is going to be using the PPP model in, then the interest in investment community is always going to be remaining, and they are always going to be on high alert for new projects. So in PPPDA, we are actively seeking to build up the pipeline. So as I mentioned before, in energy sector, we already have a number of projects, but we are actively looking for other projects, especially in renewable energy, as the presidential decree stated, and the strategy of Ministry of Energy was saying that they are going to be moving away from the usual modes of energy and moving more towards renewables. And renewables are mainly going to be built under the PPP model. The education, healthcare and transport are also high priority on the list, but apart from that, we are trying to build the projects which will have a real significant impact on people's everyday lives. So the water supply, the sewage treatment plants, the agriculture and those kind of things, we are trying to build the models for private-public partnership. So we are working on the number of projects, and we are going to be building the pipeline quite actively. And I see that once Uzbekistan gets enough experience in implementing those PPP projects and gets enough trust of the investors, both local and international, then I could see that the PPP philosophy in Uzbekistan is going to be developing even further, and we are going to be delivering quite promising results on it.
Mr. Nuriddinov, we are very grateful that you visited our studio, and we hope to see you here again with another very successful projects in PPP model.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.